City Clerk, will you do a roll call for us, please?
Councilmember Williams,
Present.
Reed.
Here.
Jackson,
Here.
Waller, Lanu,
Here.
Williamson,
Here.
and Mayor Snyder.
Here. Alright, so, we are here this morning to discuss our budget for the 2022 fiscal year. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Director Mead. Everybody just make sure that we have our cell phones on silent, please, before we get done. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm gonna start with a question, actually. We have some drafts, but I don't know. They will be in the final packet, and I guess I'm wondering if you'd like, I could load them on, kind of take over Jill's seat for a minute and put them on her computer just to go through if you want them up on the screen. Otherwise, it's just if you want the visual. So
Yeah, I would love the visual.
you would, okay.
Is
Yeah.
Is that a problem too? Like, I mean, it'll only be the first part here. Unfortunately, our IT guys, I don't know what they're thinking, but they give me a laptop, finance director, a laptop without Excel. So,
That's not working.
you know, okay, you're gonna start out.
Share the screen, so it's on.
See, Chief Kipper doing this, man, I should hand this over to him, he's the tech.
I can do it if you want, I just don't know.
No, I don't. Okay, so we're gonna start with general fund this morning, and general fund has multiple departments. The first being revenues, and that's where the key revenues of the city come in. All your property tax, income tax, state share revenue, all that kind of stuff. So this first chart. How this comes out. Just kind of gives a breakdown of what the city revenues are made up of. Property tax continues to be the largest at 31%. Second is the state share, sales and use tax, the revenue sharing, 28%. And income tax is a close third at 25%, and all others are 16%. And I should point out, there are other revenues within departments that are department specific in general fund, but these are the primary revenues that are just kind of the generic general fund pot that everybody's trying to divvy up for everybody's, for all the departments to get their expenditures. So having said that, we jump over and let's see what's going on with property tax. Pretty decent trend. They've been inching up steadily, which is a great thing for many, many, many years. They were on a declining trend, and we finally got that turned around. I didn't really do this very well on the screen, so. So I went back to 2015 forward. see they're inching up. The only thing that I will say that it's a little bit of a stickler with property tax is the state will, because of heavily, we are limited as to how much we can recognize each year on the increase. So the taxable values can jump a lot, but the state then will adjust our millage so that we can't recognize the full increase. It's usually about 2.5% that they allow it to increase, and it caps out there. The exception is if you have new property in town. So probably the 1 year where that went up like $1,162,000 between 1920. Took a pretty good jump here, 125,000. I think that was probably maybe when the hotel came on. We had a few other things, the Taco Bell, the brewery, a few things. When you get new buildings, new renovated buildings, you can recognize 100%. But for all your existing, just because the demand and taxable values going up, you're capped at how much it can go up. But it's on a positive trend, so that's good.
Director Reed,
Yes,
I just wanted to confirm, because I heard you say 1920, but you were saying between 2019, 2020, the hotel was finally built,
I'm guessing
and now
that's
it's a
roughly
new
when
property.
I'm guessing that's roughly when it came out of roll. The year it was finished, it wouldn't come on until the following.
Okay. But that's an example of new construction, and that's like where the huge spike can
Yeah.
come from.
There's that, I know Taco Bell's in there somewhere. As a matter of fact, I think a little earlier, is the dialysis center came out too. So anytime you get a new building that's big, that's a big boost for property tax revenue. Like I said, the second largest was income tax. Income tax, again, I went back to 2015, went forward. It's been pretty erratic, and that's one of the things that we're trying to address. There's a couple reasons for it. Obviously, 2020, we had COVID, we had a lot less businesses that had people who are working, so they weren't submitting the withholdings. Plus, some of this, you gotta remember too, if you have 1 year that's really, really high, like in 2019, people don't file their returns until the following year. So sometimes there's a lot of refunds that net against this in the following year. So it's probably a combination of a lot of refund in 2020 based on this high 19 number, and also COVID. We just didn't get into withholdings from corporations. But the big thing too with this is the sporadicness on income tax. I mean, being our second largest revenue source for general fund, third largest. We really need to try to kind of stabilize that some. So that is why we focus on this aggressive collection of the income taxes. All of you probably heard all the others, but I don't know, maybe heard from residents that are questioning or upset or whatever. But we're just trying to take a more aggressive approach on making sure we're getting what is due to the city from the income tax, because that is the one big revenue source that's really jumping around a lot. So we want to try to maximize what we can get on that. If we look at all three of these combined, again, you can see the income tax one, which is in green. Going back to 15, again, that's the one that as a whole, most of them are kind of on increased. But income tax again is really up and down, kind of sporadic. So we really are trying to focus on getting an aggressive collection for income tax. The fourth thing in general fund that we look at, we just kind of call all other revenues. And all other revenues, anything, charges for services, grants, different types of things. So you can see in the years that we were down a lot. We had this big jump here recently, which of course is the CARES Act money and the ARPA money. Actually, though, ARPA money, there's not much ARPA money in this yet. This is mainly CARES Act grant. Source they reimburse us for some of the frontline wages. There's another one for revenue loss that came in at 2020. So, you know, our income tax was real low, but on the flip side, luckily we had the CARES grants coming through. So our other revenue did take a jump at 20, and we anticipate taking another jump at 21. Yeah, the ARPA money is kind of at our discretion when we want to spend it over the next several years. So obviously, lost revenue is an eligible expense, especially if it's tied to ARPA. So we have it there to use, but I don't know that we'll really need to use much of it in 2021. I'm thinking I'm a little more concerned maybe 22, 23, going out a few years, and I'll explain why.
Got a question.
Sure.
ARPA, what is ARPA?
Yes, that.
The rescue
It's the
plan.
American Rescue Plan Act Fund.
Yeah, I
Okay.
forgot what it stood for, but this was when Biden, well, going back to the CARES Act, that was, you know, from the federal government because of COVID. And then when the Biden party took office, they come up with this ARPA. What's it called?
The
American
American
Rescue,
Rescue
yeah.
Plan.
Gotcha.
They come up with another program. And it goes to the state, and the state then can trickle it down to the counties and the local government. And they determine Albion will get 870, yeah, somewhere 878,000 or 76,000, something like that.
Thanks, and
Pardon me?
All right, now that money's to be used to fill in where we would have that gap from the state sales revenues or something like that.
Any lost revenue, they've been, the CARES Act grant was pretty specific on what you could use it for. This ARPA money, they've been pretty lenient on their definition, so. One of the eligible things is lost revenue from any source, so, you know, they're saying like if it's COVID, if you think it's COVID related, you know, obviously with their income tax, businesses being closed, or workers working from home, whatever the case may be, we know we have some lost revenue from income tax that we can use, we will have other revenue losses, which I'll get into in a minute, but, yes, to answer your question, any lost revenue allowed to use that ARPA money to help build.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's, so that's kind of the revenue. One thing that I said that we're gonna have some issues with other COVID related revenue laws. And sometimes things we don't think of directly, you don't see a direct hit on. One of the things you think about when they did the census, it was in 2020, right at the heart of the pandemic. Cities all over the state, particularly the college town and cities, are really upset because most of their students have gone home. You can only kind of assume that maybe conducting the census, maybe not work quite as aggressive at going door to door. You know, there might not have been quite as conscientious effort at getting the numbers because there's a pandemic going on, people were worried about their health and everything else. Statewide, I think the numbers were down in the 2020 census, but here in Albion, they definitely were. To be tuned of almost 900 people. Unfortunately, some of the revenue that we get, that we received is based on our population. One of those is the state revenue sharing, and the calculation I did based on our population loss and what they pay per person is gonna be about just under 100,000 a year for the city of Elgin before just our decline in population from the 2010 census to the 2020 census. Now, the odd thing about that is the state has not implemented the new 2020 census numbers yet, but they have told us when they do, they are not only going to lower our current revenue payments going forward, but they are going to make it retro back to their fiscal year, which was October 1st of 2020. So that first hit is really going to hit us hard because we're going to have, you know, almost $100,000 drop from 2020 through September of 21, and then when, you know, this 100,000 a year going forward. So you know, we got that hit coming sometime. I don't know when the state's going to implement that. But fortunately, that we do have the ARPA money there if we need it to try to help balance our budget. So it's just something to be aware of it. But the bad thing is, I mean, the ARPA money, we can only use it through 2026. The next census won't be taken until 2030. So unless, and I've not heard anything like this, and I haven't seen anything about, you know, talk. I mean, everybody's upset, all the communities, the Michigan Municipal League. I mean, I don't know whether they would try to say, hey, those numbers are pandemic going on, maybe they're not fair to figure that out or use those numbers. I don't know, but as it stands right now, for the next 10 years, our state revenue sharing is going to be down at least 100,000 and probably a little more as you go forward, because every year it usually gets a little larger based on the formula. So that per person amount is probably going to grow a little bit. So having lost the 900 some people, what we don't receive is going to be a little larger this year. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so jump into, so that's kind of our revenue situation. Figure out, not familiar with the computer, too. Where's my?
Be looking for that.
Right there.
What's under it?
is. All right. So now if we get into expenses. Okay, so general fund, I mean, as a city, for the most part, we're a service industry, right? We provide services.
Director, me, sorry to interrupt, is the screen sharing still on?
No, it's not. How'd you do this?
So,
Second from the right.
all the way over.
Am I looking at over? Or left, could be your left.
Oh, okay, there you
Click on the picture of the people. And then down there it says, yeah,
go. Sorry about that.
and then click on the one to make sure.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Like I said, cities, we provide services, I mean, obviously, some are state mandated, you know, elections, collect their taxes, doing that kind of stuff. A lot of it is for safety, with public safety, police and fire, code enforcement, again, kind of safety type thing. Building inspections, there's a lot of type of services, and then also a little bit of recreation, parks, and of course, the other thing, we do provide cemetery for people who lost loved ones. You know, it's all pretty much a service any way you look at it. So with a typical service industry, 66% of our general fund expenses are payroll related. So even with purchase of police cars and, you know, some of the equipment out to the cemetery and cars and all that, even with that all factored in, you know, pretty much 66% of our expense in general fund is from the payroll related type expenses. Having said that, take a look at if we take a look at the payroll related expenses, we see that they have been steep incline, not steep, but steady incline. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, your revenues tend to fluctuate a little bit up and down. You know, things happen in the economy and, you know, the pandemic, different things. But a lot of your expenses are pretty well, you know, established by most times things outside of, you know, our health insurance went up 6% this year. Generally, we see some increase every year. That's a big part of our payroll related expense. We have union contracts. They've averaged 2-3% increase a year. So, you know, again, kind of showing you this trend of expenses. You know, the large part of our expense general fund is kind of on an upward trend. Revenues are a little bit upward, somewhat sporadic, but you know, they're not quite as a steady climb as the expenses. So we're kind of getting into some years where I think it's going to be a little critical, and how we end up coming out at the end of the year. I mean, I think we're going to feel the effects of COVID-19 for a few more years, and with the state capping how much we can increase property tax. You know, it'll be a challenge. I think the next few years might be a little difficult, but again, the trend is positive, so hopefully things will work through it. We'll get through this period, and especially if we get some new businesses and stuff in town. I mean, I would say that's the biggest thing you can do to help improve revenue.
Georgia, Reed, is there any indication that the Heavy Act could be amended? I remember talking about that years ago, and I've seen some things. I'm curious.
It's actually still ongoing talk. In fact, some of the big lobbyists in Michigan Municipal League had broke off. Michigan Municipal League and formed this Southeast Michigan Coalition for, it's got to be some Semco, so it's big on it. And what their whole goal is trying to really put some pressure on the state and educate the state. You know, when Headley was passed, obviously way back, you know, all those legislatures for the most part gone. And now you have newer legislatures, people in the House and Senate and stuff that don't really understand the impacts of it. You know, I think back when it was passed, everybody kind of felt that property was always going to continue to increase in value or appreciate. We found out that wasn't the case. You know, we had a couple of market crashes in real estate, and it was devastating for the communities. And the SEMCOG, SEMCOG is their acronym. They have formed this group that is constantly pressuring the legislatures, trying to get them to understand that the funding mechanism for the cities is not working. And one of the big problems, of course, is the head. So it's ongoing. They're still, putting a lot of pressure on them. So that's something we can hope for, that they will have some success. Getting through to them, and maybe we'll come up with some kind of different structure, tax system, or whatever, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
I was just gonna say, at least from what I can see here, I mean, there's a bill pending for modification of how the heavy rollback is calculated, but it was only introduced in the House and it hasn't had any movement since end of September.
Thank you.
Got to grab my lunch when I'm up there. Actually, it was just employed to help get Jill closer to the government. Works for me. Okay, so talk about revenue, talk about expenses. I don't know at this time, we could kind of go through back here. Is everybody seen, if you get down to the first page of the actual budget numbers themselves, the very first page should be.
Page 13. Page 13 of your text.
So what we looked at on these charts was more or less a recap, kind of what's on page 13 here. We talked about the major revenues. We talked about the major expenses, most of the payroll related. We're ending up, having said all that, with a projected, in this case, actually, expenditures over revenues of 103,000 for 2021 is what we're projecting, and 184,000 of expenditures over revenue for 2022. Now, a couple things about that. First off, a few years back, the council had approved the demolition of Union Steel building. That has taken out about 300,000. I don't remember specifically the year. There was like 150 the first year, and it was paying 50,000 for the county per year after that. So that obviously impacted where we end up. Also, the one key thing I wanted to show is when we project the current year expenditures, and I've said this before, but it's just important to really understand. We really project it very conservatively. So on this graph, is it shared? Yes. Okay. I went back to 2015 and I've shown that the speech, whatever you want to call it, that's what we project in the current year. The green is what we actually come in at every single year, whether we come in with a surplus or a deficit. The surplus is much higher, and the deficit obviously is much less than what is projected. And again, that's unfortunate kind of the way the state looks at our budgets. They really penalize you if you anticipate a certain amount of expenditures, and then at the end of the year you have to get a big bill or something that comes in that's unexpected and it puts you over. They write you up for it, and then you have to explain to the state why you went over budget. So in this current year, we set our projections pretty conservative, pretty high, on expenses. We want to make sure we don't have any surprises coming in at the end of the year that might, put us over budget. So in 2021, when we're talking, coming in with this shortfall, I don't anticipate that happening. But that's just kind of a conservative projection. And if that doesn't happen, then obviously, any surplus will carry forward because your fund balance, is accumulation, your surpluses. So any fund balance, if we have a surplus of 2021, it'll carry forward. And I really suspect we should, because we, have people off on furlough to save money. We had a lot of vacant positions that we didn't fill to save money. I think that it's very likely we'll end up in the year with surplus. And of course, we've got ARPA kind of in our back pocket if we need it. So again, that's a very precautionary number. 2022, I did not put any ARPA money in there. Again, it's in our back pocket if we need it. This Union Steel payment that we make to the county will end in, it's 2022 last year, 2022. 2022, I think. So this is the last year we'll have that, or next year will be the last year we'll have that. I don't, again, we have the ARPA in our pocket for lost revenue if we have any, so pretty comfortable, I feel pretty good about this particular budget, even though it shows that we're coming in short. Part of that is because we're actually conservative in 2021, and part of it is because we haven't used any ARPA money in 2022. And the other thing too is when we do a budget for the next year, we assume the worst. So we assume, 100% vacancy in all the positions. Historically, I don't know when that's ever happened. We've always had, vacant, sometimes larger positions, larger paying positions with city managers, directors, public safety is currently now 4 positions. We put off hiring all 4 of them for about 5 months so that we can help the 2022 budget. So we're always kind of taking that into account when we have vacancies to make sure that our current year budget is doing what we can, I guess, to come out as positive as we can. So I feel pretty good about the numbers. As in terms of fund balance, you see on the bottom of that sheet, it does show, that it is declining some because of that. But again, 300,000 for the steel building, I mean, that's a lot of money coming out of fund balance over, over the course of 3-4 years. I think I have charts on that. Actually, it's on the same. So there's a fund balance, going back from 15 forward through 2022. It's bouncing around a little bit, but still pretty healthy. If I look at it in terms of percentages, bear in mind the state wants to see 15%, which is, we're almost double that. So I feel pretty good. I mean, I think this chart kind of exaggerates a little bit on the fall. I mean, yes, it is coming down, but I mean, if you look at where 15% is, I mean, we're still well above that. It's still pretty strong. I don't think and again, we have not used any of the ARPA money either. This is in there in our pocket if we need it. So I feel pretty confident about general fund. But I don't know if any of the department, I mean, there was, probably all saw there was some memos put in here about some of the things going on. Not anything real significant. We can go through some of that if you'd like, or. Pitch in anything, I don't know, how does everybody feel, if there's questions on it, or want to. Cover some of the department stuff a little more. Any thoughts, anybody?
Tom, you had that one graph up when we were looking at the projected as opposed to the actual.
Yeah.
2016, there was a huge difference from what was projected to what actually came in. For the very year 2016.
Yeah.
Do we have it? What would have happened in that year?
I'm trying to think, it's been a while, 16. That might have been. Thank you. Scott, do you remember, were you the acting city manager then? Do you know where we were?
I didn't get it.
In
2016, between the projected budget and what actually.
I don't recall, for sure I was here until 17, but.
Oh, okay.
I'm just wondering why there was a huge difference.
I would have to dig into this. So I got detail, I could probably. Actually, let me do this. If you want to hold on that question, I'll dig into detail at some point. And see what happened next. Well, I think, I take that back, I can't go back to 16 here. Yeah, without, get my computer downstairs.
Just want to make sure we're learning from that mistake. Is that something?
Yeah, I mean, anytime I come in extra high, I mean, that's just happy. Unfortunately, 16 is too long, I can't remember. I don't recall off the top of my head what had happened in 16. But I can't recall. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of year like here, we have a pretty good swing. Yeah, a lot of it is just trying to be extra cautious in the current year so that we don't go over. And part of it is the general fund is approved, the budget's approved on a department level, so most of the other funds, all the other funds are approved at a fund, total fund level, total fund revenue, total fund expense. General fund, the state says it's gotta be a department level, so you have some departments that, if you got a whole bunch of line items in there, and you're trying to be conservative on every line item, just to make sure one doesn't go over, so that department doesn't go over. If you're over 10% on every single account, that adds up. So, some of it, I think, is just being extra conservative. Maybe we were more cautious than we needed to be with the projections. So we act well to see what do some research on that. Other questions on 2021 or 2022 budget for 2021?
And just to go over what's in your packet, we included a memo highlighting any significant changes to any of the accounts, followed by a summary of all of the funds, and then start beginning on page 43. That's where you get the full detail, which highlights all of the accounts under each department fund.
So it's page what?
Beginning on page 43 in the packet, that's where you'll find all the full detail.
That's what I was saying. I didn't know if you wanted to spend any time on any of that. If anybody had any questions on that type of stuff, or if you wanted to.
Do you have any questions for Director Mead before he turns it over?
I'm not done yet, but I just.
Yeah, I was sure going to allow the other directors to turn to speak.
Yeah, if they want to, they're more welcome.
No, I mean, when you went through when you brought the pictures up and the diagrams, and really explained, had a lot of things highlighted, so you answered many questions. Then as we go through, I'll just see if you're in.
Yes, Councilman Woody.
Thank you, Mayor Senator. I think right now I'm thinking like high level, we have a strong general fund balance, we have a lot of needs, like thinking about the way in which we can address the city's needs. And I just keep going back to when we had the study session about the ARPA funds, and City Manager Snyder brought that list of all the things that the city thinks would be the top priority to invest in, should we feel like we have the strength in our budget to do so. So I'm just thinking about Councilman Williams, and probably, I sent you some stuff to try to help, think about where we're at, but I guess that study session would be another key thing to revisit when thinking about the city's budgetary priorities.
Absolutely, and since having that initial study session on the ARPA funds, I guess I would say, our priorities haven't changed, but in a sense they have, with releasing of how our census numbers are going to affect just our revenues moving forward. I think before, when we presented our recommendation, we did propose using some to cover revenue loss, but since receiving our numbers on what we will be receiving moving forward, that's, I think, kind of changed. And we want to make sure that we have a healthy general fund and have a balanced budget, because without that, we can't provide any services. So I think we're just constantly, as Director Mead stated, because we just need to keep that in mind. Yes, we do have a healthy general fund, but we also have really aged infrastructure where we could have a hit on something in our community that could pull a good portion of that. So we just need to be mindful of all of that moving forward. If that makes sense.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, just to make sure, in terms of the allocation of recovering lost funds is probably grown.
Yes.
You're anticipating
Yes.
that.
Yes.
I did have one other question. It's pretty specific, so maybe not the right time. But at the last council meeting, we discussed the recreation village, and I'm doing the leaf pickup today. And I was coming out of my own pocket to get things like snacks and bags and things like that. So someone was like, well, doesn't the city have money for Parks and Rec? And I was like, I don't know how those funds are supposed to be used, if it's just for programming. But that was one question I had, generally speaking, about the recreation village.
Yes, our recreation village is solely for program expenses. Director Mead, please correct me if I am wrong, or if there is a portion that we.
No, yeah, you're right. I get what's going through my mind is we will get to the rec fund a little later. If we
Okay.
wanna-
Yeah. Thank you.
Councilman Vincent, do you have
I was also just gonna point out, when in a budget year, we cannot budget for anything that is expenses over revenues, correct? So even if we have a healthy fund balance right now, like 1.2 million, if our income for the year is projected to be 4 million, we can't budget for more than 4 million in expenses, correct?
Actually not, and I'm
Okay,
glad you brought that up. I should have.
because the previous years it's been explained differently, so I wanted to make sure that the people had fairness.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that, so I meant to say that when I was talking about where we were, when we proposed this, or the budget we brought to you this morning, of course, does have expenses exceeding revenue. The state definition of a balanced budget is to have adequate revenues and or fund balance to cover your expenses. So we obviously have way more fund balance, to cover that shortfall, if you will, for 21 and 22. So that's why I'm comfortable, I guess, with this budget. We're not getting into fund balance that much to cover those expenses on that shortfall. And again, that meets the terminology of the state, or definition from the state of a balanced budget. So did that answer your question?
It answered my question, it's just that, my experience on council has been that we're not allowed to dip into fund balance as part of budget priorities, so this year it's different. I guess maybe I had a fundamental misunderstanding the last 2 budget cycles. So we're just asking.
No,
It's good to understand that that we haven't covered?
I think, I'm trying to think back maybe on what has been said in the past. I think, you know, we've had years like this before where we've come with a proposed budget that does require some, you know, dipping into fund balance. I think what we try to avoid is to rely on fund balance to cover on a long-term basis, just your general operations. This is a little different, you know, we do have, number one, the Union Steel building that's voted on by council to come out of fund balance. But number two, we had a pandemic, and things are really chaotic, you know, as far as revenues and stuff right now. So I don't think we're making this a long-term priority or trend, you know, that we're gonna dip into fund balance every year just for our operational costs. It's just more of an issue. So where we're at right now with the pandemic, Union Steel and some of that kind of stuff, we probably will be dipping into a little bit the next couple of years with that. So
When is our last payment on Union Steel?
I think it's 2022.
Okay, so we'll be done with that in 2022.
$50,000.
We were essentially forced to do that in
Yeah.
order to get
Right.
Union Steel down. I mean, I remember that meeting, it was ridiculous.
Yep.
So.
Otherwise,
Thank you, Mayor. So when we're referring to fund balance, we're talking about the surplus from the previous year,
Actually, all previous, every year.
the accumulation.
Yep, exactly. And if it's a loss that reduces fund balance, if it's a surplus, it adds to fund balance. But it's an ongoing accumulation of it.
All right, thank you.
any other questions?
Back over to Jill.
I'm sure I click up top and just stop share. Over at the top of the screen.
Oh, stop here. So there we go. Okay, if everybody's comfortable with general fund, we can move on. And where you found that general fund. Where you found it.
Page 43.
Yeah, what was it? 13?
Page 42.
40, yeah, okay,
13?
yeah.
The actual
No,
budget,
Yeah, with the language at the bottom.
yeah, that's 43 in that packet.
That's a little detail, if you just want the summary of each fund.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have page numbers on mine, so.
Okay.
So that was general fund. If we're good, well, I mean, first off, congratulations on that, because that is by far the hardest one to get through, so. the rest of
I
it-
have a question.
Yeah.
Since they're general fund, so we don't actually have like a rainy day fund. So like, our rainy day fund is the general fund, correct? So like, when a truck goes down, or when construction equipment goes down, or if a fire truck needs to be replaced, unless we have grant dollars, we're gonna have to dip into the general fund, correct?
Yeah, I would call our fund balance, a lot of people call fund balance your rainy day fund, basically. It accumulates your surpluses over the time, kind of a savings almost, if you will, where if you have an emergency or something, you know, critical, that's where you would dip into to pay for something big. I can give you an example. We had one year, Chief Cliff probably can remember more, but I know we had the ladder truck years ago, the old ladder truck, and we sent it out to get repairs, and the bill came back like in December, really late in the year, and we had no place to pay. It was a big bill, you know, so we voted to take it out of the fund balance and cover it, so.
And that's because there's no other option really. I mean,
No, not really. I mean, there's not, in general fund, it's not really designed for accumulate or purchase a lot of equipment and, you know, fortunately Chief Gibb got us a grant on the new ladder truck. You know, that we really try to rely on grants if you're doing anything major, you know.
So 1.2 million is like healthy, but it's not exactly. I mean, it can be wiped away pretty quickly with one.
Yeah,
emergency.
you know, when you think about what, sometimes the state sets guidelines and, you know, it's like, that's great, but is there common sense there? I mean, so they basically just say across the state, you know, let's try to have all local communities at least have 15% or more. But every community's budget's, you know, a lot different, so 15% of, you know, 100 million is a lot different than 15% of 3 or 4 million, and you're right, but the cost of a fire truck's the same for everybody, you know?
Uh-huh.
I think the most recent expenditure out of where we had to pull from our fund balance was the replacement of the boiler. And that was in 2019, I think. And that was over 60-something thousand outside of.
Yeah, and I'm just making the point that like we have a really healthy fund balance and we have, I mean, for a really long time. And it's also the cost of fixing things is going up and we pay the same no matter what, like we pay the same for a fire truck as Detroit pays. So while our fund balance is healthy to our budget size, I mean, we really, it could be wiped away pretty clean with one problem. So
Yeah.
so it's good, but keep in mind, you probably leave the budget conservatively and continue finding grants, right?
Absolutely, that's a good point, and I feel like you do. I feel that, and again, I'm a little probably biased on the number side because I'm a finance person, and I feel I always sleep easier at night knowing we have that there. So my thought on it is, it's nice to have that rainy day fund for irregularities and, you know, income or revenue or just little odd things that come up that might have to carry us through on, you know, just a normal year. As opposed to, I would be way more nervous if we said, well, we're gonna start taking big chunks of money out of here to go buy, you know, whatever.
Or knock down a building.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, sorry, I'm not trying to derail you. I just-
No, not at all. That's good. I agree with that philosophy. Anyone else? All right, so the next fund, and I think you'll notice they're kind of in order as far as numeric order. So general funds, you know, fund 101. We got, next one's 202 is major streets. Major street is where, actually, the next two, 202, 203, major street, local street. Those are the funds that the Act 51 money comes into. And those are also the funds that are designed for kind of more of your routine maintenance on the streets, you know, the potholes, the winter snow plowing. You know, things like that. There's typically not really even use money for building new streets, but we can use money out of there for street construction if there's enough in there to cover it. But primarily, it's more for the maintenance of the streets, and that's where the Act 51 one comes in from. With these two funds, we don't anticipate any major changes. In Fund 202, we're looking at a net revenue over expenses of about 197,000. You know, again, most of that's Act 51 money. But I do want to caution you, the other thing that the state uses our census numbers for is in the computation of Act 51 money. So based on the formula they use for our current year, I went through, and if we have that 900, roughly 900 people lost in population, it's going to come out to about 71,000 a year between those two funds that we will lose. And again, unfortunately, you know, that's 10 years before the next census comes out. So it's gonna hit us hard there too. So between the two, you almost 100 on the general fund and 71,000 here. So I mean, 171,000 just because census numbers were down, which a lot of people think that a large reason for that was because of COVID. So very unfortunate, but I guess it is what it is. The only thing I guess I'll kind of point out on major fund 202 there, major streets. If you look at 19, the fund balance was $1,025,000. And if you look in the 2021 column, what we're projecting it down to be 645. You know, it's a $380,000 loss. If you can just kind of keep that in mind a little bit, because we're going to talk about that a little later. You don't need to know the actual number or amount, but just recognizing that the fund has dropped, the fund balance has dropped. And on the next page, local streets, fund 203. Again, if you look at 19, fund balance was 455.9. And we're projecting that to end the year at 321, so that's $185,000 drop. So again, just if you can keep that in mind that we have this pretty good drop in fund balance on these two funds, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But other than that, are there questions on major and local streets? And many of these funds will go fairly quick now. There's not a lot going on with some of them. But the next page, fund 208 is recreation. Obviously, everybody I think is aware of the change there. You know, with the Y, we contract 115,000 a year. They are pretty much taking over all the program stuff. There's a few other expenses they have. Of course, we give the senior center about just under 11,000 a year. You know, that was part of the millage agreement when the millage was passed. They also have a van in the rec department, actually a couple vans. And they rent them out, so the revenue isn't very significant, but you know, we budget some like gasoline and some repairs just in case the vans go down or something. They have some budgeted, some other expenses in there. So besides the 115 to pay the Y, there's a little bit of other expenses in there, but not a lot. So, but they're coming in pretty decent still. You know, we're projected about a 66,000 surplus in 2021 and about $50,000 surplus in 2022. I don't know if you want to go to your question, not remember the new one, recreation. And what, I'm sorry, so was it, you said a leaf pickup, so was it a recreation thing?
No, so it was just offered to me, like maybe Parks and Rec have some resources, but I know we don't have a combined Parks and Rec department personal.
I don't know
I
why.
think my question was more related to, you know, what the recreation millage qualifies for, and my thought was just programming, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, honestly, for something like what you're talking, I probably wouldn't consider it. When you do special villages, they're even more restricted because when you put it in front of the voters for something special, you really want to make sure that that is what you're doing with the money. Parks is in our general fund. You can have a little bit more leeway. The only thing that you got to be concerned about is we're pretty restricted on what we can use money for on when it comes into food and different types of things that are, I mean, it can be done if in certain circumstances, if it's kind of a case by case basis, you know, as a part of training, is it benefiting, is the public invited, is it invited, you know, is everybody involved, or is it just I'm buying treats for my employees or something, you know, that's not a good thing. You know? So there are some restrictions on how money is spent for, because I think is that what you were talking about is,
Yeah, just like general expenses for volunteering day.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it gets a little tricky, I mean, I don't know, we can talk about, I got a thing to add the public act that explains kind of what's considered acceptable expenses and stuff, and I can get with you on that if you want, so. Other questions on recreation?
Okay, so because this is becoming a topic over the last couple of weeks, so there is money in the parks with the recreation village. There are organizations and or individuals who would like to take advantage of some of those resources to do programming. I don't know what the process is for those folks to be able to get in line to be vetted and then get in front of the, I know we have a Parks and Recreation Commission. I think as a safeguard for the city, we should outline some formal process so that when the inevitable happens, when one person or entity gets funded and another does not, we actually have a process in place. I'm sure there might be some internal controls already, but the chatter is too high about it right now, especially in light of how we're doing recreation. And so I think it would be good for the city to have a process in place and have it out there so people understand how to do that. That way, like if some organization wants to organize a parks cleanup day, if someone wants to do soccer programming, if someone wants to do adult softball league, something, then we know you start here and then this is where you end up to get funded or not. So I want to make that suggestion.
And you need to start the initial conversation with my office, and then depending on what they want to do, it goes before the Parks and Recreation Commission, would make a formal recommendation to council.
Thank you.
That's good things to think about when I mean, first of all, this recreation, obviously, we completely revamp, how it operates. And when you do that, sometimes things like this come up, and that's a great point, we really gotta be careful on not saying, well, we'll help this group and not that group, and I mean, those type of things are really critical when you're talking using, taxpayer money and stuff, so that's a good point. Other questions? Yes.
I was just gonna, because I know there were some questions, but I just pulled up the ballot language that we did for the last recreation launch, and it was exclusive to programming.
Thank you.
Now, when we say program, that means that these are charitable organizations or businesses.
Programming is generally, in the recreation budget, programming would be like the activities you can put on for whether it be the kids, or like I said, we do send some money to the senior center so they can do some activities for the seniors, but we also like the Y, of course, is doing all that. It's basically programs that the Y are putting on for local citizens here, whether they be young or, adult or whatever age, I guess, I'm not. Whatever
The
they.
full continuum of services.
Yeah.
Okay, and they need to see. Perfect, thank you.
Other questions on recreation? Next one is a new fund, and it's because of the new millage, the county park millage, or Calvin County Park millage. We did receive the payment in 2021. That was the first payment we received at $21,417. We have not spent and do not anticipate spending any of that this year, 2021. And this is a case where you kind of see on the fund balance. So because we didn't spend any of it, that whole amount carry over into the fund balance to start next year. We anticipate receiving a payment of roughly $21,550 in 2022. So the fund balance at that point in time would be the accumulation of both of those. However, in 2022, we had anticipated spending a portion of it, or actually a large portion of it. I don't think anything's been identified exactly yet. I just put a number in there that would leave our fund balance at like around 5,000. So I don't think we want to take fund balance per to zero, but if we do decide to start spending some of that money, Like I said, I just picked that number, 37,967, just to get it to where our ending fund balance would be 5,000. So questions on that?
I could speak a little bit about, so council for the 2021, our disbursement of our parks millage, if you can recall, you approved to put, I believe it was a little over 10,000 to put, to redo the courts within Victory Park. And Director Miller, if you want to share a little bit, when seeking bids to move forward with that project, it was like pulling teeth the entire summer. I don't know how many, Director Miller can share how many companies he's reached out to, just with the pandemic, a lot of companies, they were booked, and I hate to say it, we were ghosted by the original, I believe it was Schweitzer Construction, who received the initial quote from. So we have not spent those funds, so we will be looking to roll them over to 2022 with a plan to move forward with that project.
Yes, if I'm not mistaken, 10,000 went to do the things at Victory Park. And the other 11,000 went to Holland Park.
I don't recall that, we can check the minutes, but I believe the only portion for 2021 was to do the repairs in Victory Park.
Yeah, I know 10,000 was milk farms. Yeah, would you double check that, because if I'm not mistaken, we voted on the other 11 going to Holland Park.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is there any way to try to like, get a jump start on the bids for next year?
Yes, so we're having Whiteman Associates actually design that project so that we can move forward the formal bid process.
Yeah, basically, we just started too late because of the way the funding came out.
Okay.
Everybody was already booked up. I checked with at least 5 different companies. And Schweitzer was the first company that actually did that. And I had them come out and met with them, and then it was like weeks and weeks that kept going.
Okay,
So, yeah, we'll probably start bidding that out late winter.
okay.
Other questions? All right, moving on, the next one, solid waste, 1226. Because of the tax millage, we do bring in, well, around 300,000 a year. That's not all tax millage, there's a little bit other revenue coming in, but in total, it brings in about 300,000 a year. We still bid budget a little bit and leaf pickup, just in case we have an odd year where there's a whole bunch in the streets, maybe that are plugging the sewer drains, or, just in case we wanted to leave something in there, but as you can see, like, for example, well, I guess it's a little early for any leaf pickup this year. I mean, we only spent 2,800 in there this year, but if you look back, 2020, we did spend 15,000. 2019, we spent 15,450. So we do spend some money in leaf pickup, even though we have Granger doing mostly residential. Bear in mind, the city has a lot of properties that we own, and there is a great deal of cost still for leaf pickup, but nothing like, I think before Granger, we were spending 60,000-70,000 on leaf pickup. So it saved us a lot of money by having the Granger handle it now. The biggest thing they have, a little bit for tree dump, biggest thing, the solid waste. I mean, it just kind of covers a lot of taking care of trash, rubbish, the recycling day, just all kinds of stuff like that. But the bottom line, they're doing a lot better now. Their fund balance is growing on an increasing trend, which is good. We're looking at a projected of about 42,564 surplus, and a 2022 budget of about 44,695 surplus. Questions on that?
The transfer out, who's that represent?
Oh, yes, the transfer out is a combination of things. City Hall has some trash, a couple things, we have, made a cleaning contract, whereas for the cleaning and stuff, and they, of course, take out all the trash and it goes out into the dumpsters and all that, so that covers a little bit of that. But the biggest thing it covers is it goes to code enforcement, or a portion of it goes to code enforcement, because if they have, for example, if they go site a house and it has lots of trash, I mean, I'm talking big trash, like, yard full of whether junk cars or whatever, tires, all that kind of stuff. Solid waste can contribute into the cleanup of those. So that's the biggest portion, is it's going to code enforcement program. Thank you. Yep. Other questions? Next one is Brownfield from 243. I don't know, I guess Amy, she's not joining us, correct? She's not. The Brownfield, really, there's not a lot. The way it really works is the hotel captures tax money, not only, from the Brownfield capture, but because they're in the DDA district, there was an intergovernmental agreement where DDA allowed them to get the money that DDA captures on that building, or on that property. So they have two big sources. They capture some from Brownfield, and then DDA gives them the capture that DDA would have gotten on that building. So that's the money that comes into the Brownfield. Then all except for 5,000 of that has to be dispersed to the investor and to the state to help repay the loan that they got from the state for the cleanup of the property and all that. So it's kind of a more or less a money in, money out type situation. So that's why it's shown in 2022 budget as having, a break even, zero revenue over expense, because basically the money comes in, money goes out. So questions on that?
What do you mean by capture?
Good question. The, if the properties are located in a type of district that allows capture, and the three that Elgin has is we have the Brownfield, we have the DDA district, which is downtown, and then we have the Tiffin district, which is out in the industrial park. And those, the way, what those were created by the state as tools to help rejuvenate, whether it's downtowns or industrial parks or whatever. And what it does, you tax the parcels just like you would any other tax. I'm talking property tax. But when you look at the year, I'm gonna probably get a little more detail than you want to hear, but it's good for everybody to get a refresher on this, because it is a complicated thing. So the year that you create your district, whether, Tiffin district, DDA district, Brownfield district, you take the taxable value at that time, that's your base. And then as that appreciates over time, you can, I'm just gonna focus on DDA. DDA then can capture all the tax from the base year up to the appreciated level. The DDA gets that tax. And the idea is they use that to to reinvest into the downtown, to enhance it, to keep business or to draw other business. If we look at it like on the industrial park, for example, Tifa could capture, any appreciated value. And then what a lot of industrial parks would do is use that money to put in curb and gutter and maybe some sewer and water lines and street, to make it develop it basically. So if a new business comes in, it's kind of site ready. So the idea is that there's kind of an incentive to these districts to reinvest the money, because the more business they draw, the more values appreciate. So they can capture all the tax from that between, you know, whatever the new value is minus the base, they get to keep all that tax money, if that makes sense. It is complicated, I know. And it's extra complicated when you have a brownfield within the DDA, so, because then you're dealing with a couple different captures.
That's done annually.
It is, each billing, you know, they capture on both summer tax and the winter tax. And this will get a lot more complicated as new properties are completed downtown that are part of this brownfield. You know, a lot of them that are being renovated down there, so we'll have more than one brownfield property downtown soon. In fact, I think we already do. I think there's one I think the second one has been completed this year, and it won't go on the roll until 2022. So starting in 2022, I know we're at least gonna have 2, and there's more coming, I think. So it's gonna continue to get more complicated, if that answers your question.
I have one more question. Is there, within, so it's created at a certain year, there's a taxable base value, and then there's an end date, there's like 2 bookings when it starts?
Yes, the districts are generally created for pretty long periods, you know, 20, 30, 40 years.
Okay.
The base should never change, you know.
Right,
So,
Thank you.
and they're very complicated. At some point, when we're not looking at budget numbers and stuff, if you want me to come in and do a little, like bring some charts or graphs or something, explain, I'd be happy to do that. The next one is the EDC, Amy's main economic development fund 244. That's Amy's main fund that she oversees out there. No big changes in their revenues, really. No big changes in expenditures. They're up, the expenditures are up a little bit. I think they're gonna do some work on some site readiness, work on some properties and a few other things, but you know, they're healthy. Fund balance remains pretty healthy. They're looking at a projected revenue over expense of 25,000. I don't know if I can answer a lot of questions on behalf of EDC, but does anybody have questions on them or EDCs?
I got a question. You mentioned the readiness. So is that, like you were saying before, in the Tifa area, they were ready the properties or whatever, so that, okay.
Right. Well, in this case, so I think they're looking more at like, correct me if I'm wrong, more like environmental. With businesses are coming in, they want to make sure if they're looking at a property, you know, a big, what we call undeveloped property, they want to make sure that there's no contamination, no, that it perks well if they, or that actually, I guess perks more out in the country. It'd be more like if they do compaction tests, so if they're gonna build a factory or something, they need to know is the soil, a type of soil that will withstand the weight of the, you know, large. So I'm not sure exactly what they do on it, other than it's some type of compaction test to see how suitable the soil is for building large construction type buildings. So,
Yes, and by having this done, they're just working to better market our vacant lots and properties here in town.
Makes a lot of sense.
yeah, because I think a lot of, when you're trying to draw businesses to build something new, that's a big plus for them. If you can show them that, yep, we've already got the environmental done and, you know, it meets their needs and there's no contamination, it helps them as kind of a selling point, I guess. We're trying to convince them to come to help.
Okay.
Other questions on that?
I mean, I know you mentioned you might not be able to speak a lot to it, but I'm curious if you can speak at all to their revenues, the general and the transfer in.
Their transfer ins come from TIFA fund. Their TIFA fund does fairly well, and they do transfer money in from the TIFA fund periodically. A lot of their revenue comes from rental revenue from some of the buildings they have that they rent out to some of the businesses. I can't tell you, I know they've lost a few of those, I can't tell you exactly what all she has in that figure, if it's all for rental, or there might be some grants in there, I'm not positive.
The biggest, she gave like, I mean, there's like, page 5, a little information in here.
Okay,
There's, we transferred in the 26,000, that's from the sale of the food hub, so they're closing
Oh,
that.
yeah.
fund out. That will be transferred into the EDC fund, so, fund 246, the incubator, will no longer have an active.
yeah, I forgot about that. That will be the next page.
Oh, yeah, okay, thank you,
There's information first.
yeah, I see it,
Pages.
yeah.
And then,
Other questions? And speaking of the next page, so if we go to the next page, Fund 246, that was the incubator, kind of odd. The fund was initially created for when they had the incubator building, so it's called the incubator fund. Over time, they decided to also put the food hub in that fund, and then they also decided to put farmers market in that fund. All of which are gone now, more or less. So to talk about that briefly, obviously they sold the incubator building, I don't know, 2-3 years ago. The food hub building was sold in early this year, 2021. And the farmers market, there was an agreement that the DDA would take over the farmers market instead of keeping it in this 246 fund. So with all those three being eliminated now, there's no budget for 2022. Once we wrap up 2021, and once the audit's complete, make sure the auditors don't have any adjustments, anything remaining in this fund will get transferred over to EDC. So, and that's where I think Amy was talking about this transferring from the food hub building or anything. That makes sense. Next one, 247. This is another capture fund. The district is out in the industrial park area, and again, it's able to capture taxes from all the appreciation on the properties since from the TIFA was started, that base value, it's appreciated quite a bit since then, so they're able to get that capture. So they're bringing in about 240,000 a year. So what we're projecting, their expenditures, they are transferring some out to help cover some of the other EDC and some of the other programs, but most of it, I think, is doing some of the site readiness and trying to get the sites marketable out there and do some of that kind of stuff on the TIFA properties, industrial park properties. Again, I'm not super familiar with this being over Amy's, but I'll try to ask questions on that. No? Next one, Fund 248 is the DDA fund. Again, it's a capture fund because it's the downtown development district, so it's the capture on the downtown businesses. Here's where it gets a little crazy. You'll see they are capturing, because the hotel is in the DDA district in downtown, they are capturing on the hotel, but with that intergovernmental agreement, they've agreed to transfer the capture from that building to the DDA, to the brownfield. The good thing with this fund, if you look in 2019, they took in and captured $113,800. below that a little bit, you can see they transferred to the brownfield $108,981. So almost everything that they captured was being transferred to the brownfield, so they weren't really left with much to operate. And just to give you a history, prior to the hotel coming in, there were some periods where, because the downtown had gotten to a point where it was kind of dilapidated a little bit, the taxable value actually dropped below what the base was. So there were some years where they weren't capturing anything. And now like you see in 19, they finally, values started coming back a little bit, so they're capturing a little bit in 19. But if we jump ahead and look at 2022, we're projecting that they will capture about $136,575. They only have, of that, only about 110 is from the hotel that they need to give up. So that gap is growing. So that means more money gets to stay with DDA. And the result of that, I think, or the cause of that, I think, is, of course, you've got the brewery. Other properties are, the values kind of appreciating because people are seeing things happening downtown. So, you know, some of these things are, the businesses getting renovated, so the values are actually coming back. So it's a good thing for DDA. They're starting to get some money again. So questions on that? Next one, Fund 250, CDBG fund. Kind of almost a dormant fund, I would say, to a degree. So years and years ago, the city received a lot of initiative money that the federal CDBG gave money to the state gave it to the city, not just out into other cities. And it was for allowing residents that qualified to make home improvement repairs. And it was done in a way like any building, any kind of construction on a home, the city will get a mortgage on the amount that was borrowed. So around the city, we have probably, we're down, I don't know, we probably have 30 properties maybe where we had mortgages on the homes because they had taken out these loans or applied for and received these loans to make home improvement, home repairs to their property. Like I said, that was a long time ago. The program kind of went dormant for a number of years, and then about, I don't remember the year, not terribly long ago, Community Action stepped in and said, hey, if you guys still have some of that money left, we would be happy to administer those, more of those loans if you want. So they did, they came in and it created, loaned out some more money to some more properties here in town. So there's kind of a second wave, I guess, of this activity going on. However, the fund, as far as the cash available for doing those renovations, is more or less depleted. And the only thing we're really doing right now, the fund will earn a little bit of interest from the money in the bank, but no activity really occurs unless there is a property, one of those properties sells, or something happens in the ownership, chain of title with the owners of the property. There are clauses in there that we can get repaid when the property sells. So, and actually, coincidentally, there has been one recent one, and we'll probably have to come to the council for approval right on that discharge, on that mortgage discharge. We just received money on one, I don't know, a week ago, not long ago. And then there's another individual looking at possibly sell. So we may have to come to the council from time to time, just get approval on discharging one of those mortgages because it's real estate, it has to be approved by council. But as far as any current activity, nothing really happens with that fund. So, questions on that?
I would, oh,
Go ahead, Josh, my hand was up.
okay. I mean, I feel like this is a topic that I definitely want to see, you know, us investing in. And I don't know if this is the right way, the CDBG, and whether there's other potential for partnerships. So I'm just curious, your thoughts on like whether this could be something that there would be a third wave, or, you know, when we get the mortgage discharge, if that would be money that we could provide to residents as a, like, could that continue at all?
That's the plan for the program, as those parcels were sold and the money, mortgage paid off, it comes back to this fund and it was to accumulate, and it then is eligible to go back out on new mortgages if we choose to do something like that to administer. A couple things going on with it. When these were first done, way back, some of them are 70s, 80s, the staffing in that particular department was considerably different. There was about 5 people in that department that did, that helped oversee this stuff. And of course, we're down to 1 in that department. I was Ian. So that's one reason why the city, why it kind of went dormant for a long time, and then community action stepped in and said, hey, if you got money available, we'll be happy to administer it for you. So they did all the, they got the bids, the quotes from the contractors, they did the assessments, they did, the draw request, they did everything basically. So they did administer it. The only other thing I'll say is, I'll have to look to see the balance, but the balance is not real significant. A lot of these mortgages, it's kind of odd, most of these go way back before any of our time. But some of them were fully forgivable, some were partially forgivable, some were not forgivable. I mean, they vary a little bit, but some of them, we don't receive a payment when it just matures and they get to keep it. There's no repayment required. The other little caveat of this is, going way back, it was supposed to be kind of an issue where we were supposed to kind of keep what the city put into this fund and what Michigan put into this fund separate. And we were supposed to kind of report to Michigan. But the last planning person we had, going back to, I don't know, 16, whenever John Hart, quite a few years ago, worked with Michigan, and these are so old, even the people of Michigan we couldn't come up with any idea of how much was cities, how much was Michigan. So I think they kind of basically just said, hey, we're not gonna worry about it, you guys do what you want with it. I don't know, so there is some money there, but it's not a lot. If more of these start paying off, obviously there could be potential for that.
Can I ask Director Arner to move forward, because I know you touched on it a little bit on the report and included in the packet on your plans to grow your department and be able to take advantage of some of these programs.
Yeah, so this is, I don't want to sound like I'm putting it down at all. This is just one of the avenues to essentially do the same thing, which is provide residents with resources to improve their properties. This one, as Tom alluded to, can be a bit labor intensive on the city. There are 2 drawers about 4 feet long in my office that have probably about 12 to 18 files about that thick in them, and that is how this information is stored. So that's a little cumbersome just in terms of the age of these things. We're going to be meeting with people from USDA RD, Rural Development, soon to talk about a certain part of the town has been identified as a census tract that they have to essentially say drastically underserved in terms of public infrastructure, and they have a lot of residential programs. I have no problem saying when I bought my house, I used USDA Rural Development funds because it was a really just kind of turnkey way to get funding for property. And so in addition to a lot of the work we do with the EDC, I mean, that's more on the commercial side of things, but this is one of about a half dozen tools to help our residents improve their real estate, their property. And it keeps them living in good conditions. It helps them build assets up. The two recent ones that Tom was talking about, I don't want to say I have a bad taste in my mouth about them, but I feel like the people who had the loans initially knew what they signed up for, but their kids who now have the burden of those loans maybe don't know what they signed up for. And we're expecting to have maybe some more money in their pockets after the loss of a loved one, but now it's having to go repay these loans. So at the time when the original borrower took them, it worked really great for them, but that, you know, every program has some pluses and minuses, and that's the minus of this program.
Okay, thank you both.
I have a question. The interest rates on those loans, were they market rates or were they, so, I can't think of the word.
Subprime.
Yeah,
Most of,
No, go ahead.
most of them were interest free. Not all, there were a couple that were required to pay interest, but they were, I don't know what the one rate was back when they were made, but I would assume that these are probably a reduced rate, because they're pretty low. Most of the interest rates I've seen are 2-3%, you know, maybe, I don't know if there's any forward, they're pretty low. But I would say over half of them, I'm sure well over half of them are interest free.
Am I right also in saying that most of them aren't due until the original borrower's death, and so they're fairly long term?
No repayment on most of them that requires.
So there's some help that they do get with that in terms of inflation. $25,000 30 years ago is different than $25,000 now in terms of portion of someone's, you know, income that can be. So they don't get worse. A little bit they get better, they don't get worse.
right. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right, moving on to the next fund, Fund 265. Drug law enforcement. I guess.
Well, it's not, yeah. There's two parts of the fund. The first part is forfeiture that we get either through the state or the federal government. We are currently waiting on $432,000 that we've been guaranteed from the federal government on a case that happened or that was adjudicated over 3 years ago now. Just about a month ago, Deputy Chief Kern spoke to them again about it, and they didn't realize that the case had been adjudicated 3 years ago. The person that went to prison is already out of prison. So they're working faster to get it to us. So if you look at our budget currently for this year, there's $432,000 allocated there. There's also $432,000 allocated for next year. And I just did that because I'm not sure if it's going to show up this year or if it's going to show up next year. But I've been saying this now for about 3 years, so I'm not even sure it'll show up next year. But it would be beneficial if it did, because it would allow us to get some equipment that we currently don't have and replace some stuff that really needs replacing and we just can't afford to do out of the general fund. The rest of the revenue is from other forfeitures that we've had. Colin can probably speak better to them than I can, as he handles most of those, but.
Yeah, well, what I can offer is, I mean, in years past, we did a lot more forfeiture locally. Unfortunately for the city, the law has changed, the forfeiture law under both the controlled substance statute and the omnibus forfeiture statute was amended multiple times. I don't want to say it's almost impossible to do it now, but the way that the law is set up now is it's designed that now an individual has to be convicted of an underlying crime before we can do the forfeiture, and it doesn't work as well to do it on a local level, because if the conviction isn't exactly as it needs to be as spelled out in the statute, then we can't do the forfeiture at all. And so it's difficult to coordinate with the county to say, well, we need the, you know, in order to seize this property and forfeit it, we need the conviction to be this. they don't necessarily always do that because they have a different priority in terms of adjudicating the criminal case. So we don't do a lot of local forfeiture anymore, just for that reason, that, when we started, it was just, honors the evidence, we didn't need a conviction. Now we have a conviction, and there's a whole bunch of other restrictions built into the reforms that they did on the state forfeiture laws, so.
And then, so the second part of this fund, the middle part, the 265 is the drug law fund, the 333 is what I refer to as the forfeiture fund, the 400 is federal drug law reimbursement. So we have two officers, Deputy Chief Kern and Detective Sergeant Wygant, who are federal task force officers with the IRS. We've had that program going since I became chief, or actually before I became chief, we started doing that. So it's been 10 years now for me, so it's been over 10 years. The good part about the program with the IRS is a lot of times, or I can go back a little bit, I guess, a couple of years ago, we had our detective that was task force agent with the DEA. The DEA expects us to pay that officer and to give them to them full time. As a return, out of the forfeiture money that comes in through what they do, we get a little bit of that money depending on how big the case is and how many departments are involved and so forth. With the IRS, they don't expect me to give my people to them full time. They work full time for me, involved in some cases that the IRS does, which results in some forfeiture that we get from them in the same way, but I don't have to give them up completely. In return, they also pay for both of the detectives, or the deputy chief and the detectives' vehicles. They pay all the overtime that they accumulate working on the IRS investigations. And so most of the work that they do is in overtime that's paid for by the IRS. They also buy us quite a bit of equipment each year. There's a certain amount of money that they allocate for equipment every year. And they've bought us now 4 of our portable radios that we use. Those run $8,000 a piece, so that's huge. They also bought us 2 other portable radios that ran, I think, around $4,000 each, that don't do quite as much as the other 2, obviously, but and so that's been huge for us. They bought us 2 digital 35mm type cameras that we use for investigations. Those run, I think, about $1,500 to $2,000, somewhere in there. So we get a lot out of this agreement that we have with the IRS. So it's very, very beneficial to us, actually. And it gives us access to federal prosecutors for bigger cases and some of that kind of stuff. So it's been a good program for us, I think.
$8,000 for radios, you said?
$8,000 for radios.
I didn't see it.
They're nice radios, but I don't know where $8,000 comes from. To give you the example on that, our current radios that the officers are using on a daily basis, we got, I believe, in 2006 through federal grants. Those radios were $4,000 a piece at the time, I think. And we're still using them today. We're getting to the end of life on those. Motorola's telling us they're not going to be supporting new parts for them in the near future. So the fact that IRS is buying these $8,000 radios for us is huge. The nice part about the $8,000 radios is they're both our 800 megahertz that we use on the police side and the VHF that we use on the fire side. So I got one radio that I can communicate in both things, where the current radios, we have to carry 2 radios, one for fire, one for police, and it's a little more difficult. So. Any other questions about it? So hopefully someday we'll get some money.
The only thing I'll add to that is, it is very unfortunate, as Attorney Hartness mentioned, on the laws changing and the ability to get some of the forfeiture assets. Chief Kidd mentioned several things that they help us with. Historically, they have really helped the general fund maintain where we are, with our fund balance and stuff, because they absorb a lot of this costs that otherwise would have had to fund a general fund. It's been a great, having this particular fund's been a great fund for us to, help the general fund.
And generally, some of the things that we've used these for is, so the computers in our patrol cars have to be connected through cell service in order for them to work. That's $40 a month for each computer. We have 4 computers. We have 2 phones for the officers to use in the patrol cars. Their flip phones, they're $20 a month. The supervisor has a flip phone to use, which is $20 a month. I have a phone. All those things were paid for by forfeiture at one point. Some of those have been moved back into the general fund because of the lack of forfeiture money we've been getting. Forfeiture is also paid for our in-car cameras, which now are getting so old, they need to be updated. So that's part of what I would like to use this money that we might get coming in here soon for. Our body cameras were paid for by those things. So we have some nice equipment that we haven't had or that we've had for a while, but it's all as a result of forfeiture that otherwise we couldn't afford to have or maintain. Our body cameras, for example, we're on a 3rd generation of them right now. I think I bought the first cameras in 2015. So since 2015, we had to buy 3 sets of body cameras. They only last 2 to 3 years each before they have to be replaced just from the day-to-day use of them. So it's just, and they're originally they started at $300 a camera. I think they're up to $550 a camera now. So those prices just go up, and you've got 19 of them, so it's expensive. So that's what we've used forfeiture for in the past, just so everybody understands how to use it.
As I see it, that sums it up right there. It's been a huge benefit. for the general fund. Yes,
Can we do like a short break?
yep, sounds good.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, Colin, appreciate it.
You're a funny woman, Jill.
I know, right? I'm owning it.
I tell you all the time, because if I'm doing something wrong, you know what, you're not.
It was a long
You know, when they miss that, I'm like, CBBG.
Yes, thanks.
She insists that she. Two loans. She insists she paid them.
Show us the check stubs. You guys had a big old. Why is it ours?
So 13, it's before our. You know, direct. You haven't filed. Ian and I both have started right now. They're all. So I think they're all just. So she said, well,
Good. I'll tell you the same thing. She said she said. Oh, you got it. Great. Send us the receipts. We'll be happy to have it. That one that we just did. I don't know that it's our work district, because when I pulled up the notes are between the homeowner and the county. Now, whether or not the mortgage is between the homeowner and the city, I don't know. I haven't ever seen their mortgage unless. We can probably roll them from registered deeds. I mean, usually the mortgage is a separate, but I mean, while we were talking, because remember it was like 3 different notes for that one property, and they were priced with them, and it's all. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, so she wants to apply
Okay. It's okay, yeah, I just remember there was like a, here, okay.
I'm wondering, that gives the state gives us, we transfer it to community action does that.
Yeah, and that's what I was
Supposed to come back to
donuts or whatever.
And these guys are also.
Lots of donuts are full, you better get into them.
That makes sense.
I don't know if I can take this.
Sugar rush.
Yes.
It's good. We interesting.
Well, you know, we only see them when the states open up. And then it's like, I don't understand why everyone's all surprised by it, it's like, you know, it's like the parents are telling the kids, hey, by the way, there's not one, but two workers. I get that they're mad, because they don't want to lose like 70% of the you know, equity that's in the house, but it's like, it is what it is, it's no. Sure, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I read that, but I didn't know that was that much. Yeah, but no, I'm glad you connected with that. I read it late last night. Going into it this morning, I guess it's one.
Oh, it's me?
Councilwoman Rollback, those are your copies in the. Okay, thank you. The forum one, it was too small to where you put it, so I did two.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Just.
Oh, we'll do that. We'll do that. All right.
Just got everything.
I feel like those came yesterday.
I'll say we got, I need to stop up here and get out of bed.
Those are the ones that this is the best. And our introversion. So I wasn't there 2 years. It's someone. Yeah. And I mean, like, I'm like, okay, so where is this building?
I can see if they're actually. Oh, maybe you're kind of.
Like, this part, I know this part, and it's like they're somehow different.
Yeah, that's.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, I appreciate that.
Restaurant downtown called Food.
Oh.
I heard her there. She was like, I just.
I don't know what's good when I'm off to love.
Oh, I know where they got that from. It's a really good place. Sorry, I started knocking on the.
No,
name of it.
I'm sorry.
I was like, well, no, this one.
Anyone want a bottle of water for me?
Yes.
Please. Anyone else comments about your water?
Oh, yeah?
I don't know why I got that. It's a.
You get arrested.
That's why I said, I don't know why I got probably get out of
That's the one we all have.
Can't imagine. We have so many trees in our yard.
Sorry. It's better for you guys.
I know, me too. Grant, I probably love it. So, if it was You're going down.
But you thought you were good. So probably good. Options gone And all YouTube videos are on. They don't.
These are just. How many more they're
Yep, humidifiers were constant.
So far, I'm close.
Yeah. All right, folks, since it is 11 o'clock, we've got about a 10-minute break. Let's reconvene so that we can march through the rest.
Here's like, get to it.
Yes.
Should do this.
Now, the good news is these last ones will probably go pretty quick, for the most part. I think we left off on, we're about to start on 275. That's ADA. The only thing significant in there really, if you look at 2021 activity, there was a large revenue, 163,000. That was the sale of the food hub building. So accordingly, when you look over the 2022 column on that same line, there are no revenues, and of course, there would be no expenses for 2022 related to food hub because they are, of course, gone. Other than that, there are not really any big changes. They're looking at obviously 2021 skews a little bit because of that sale. You know, they had a big surplus, revenue or over expense, but when you look at 2022, you know, it's coming in about the same, you know, 2,200, almost 2,300, and if you look back, that's kind of comparable to 19 and 20. So taking out that sale of this food hub building that skews it, you know, they're projected for 2022 to be about the same, about on track with what they've been doing. Questions on ADA? Next one, Maple Grove, 277. They did Joellen did let us know the other day, I guess, that the HUD has approved another increase in their rates, so the rental rates for 2022, we anticipate going up again, so we got 502,000 in there is estimated revenues. Expenses are remaining about the same. Maple Grove always does fairly well as far as revenue exceeding expense. For 2022, we're looking at a 48,000 surplus. The only thing I will add, these numbers may change a little bit when we bring you the final package. There's a invoice right now that we're debating on which way we want to go with it. But it's like, there was a decision made to do an assessment on the Maple Grove building, like a structural assessment stuff, and the invoice that the proposal was 17,000. And that what they're kicking around the idea of whether they want to pay it out of here, out of Maple Grove, or whether they want to approach Elgin Trust. Since the Elgin Trust, historically, Elgin Trust was built up, if you will, from the surplus money from Maple Grove. So they're just kind of kicking the idea. One of those two budgets are probably going to change when we bring the final numbers, but just let them know that there is a invoice out there. So questions on that, Maple Grove?
So that just ties to the information you did put in here already.
I'm
The
sorry.
capital, that just ties into the information you already put in here.
This 17,000 that's not in here yet, so
You
I'm
know what I'm
saying.
saying? I apologize. Into the information to better understand the
The
needs of the
summary.
facility.
Yes.
The summary that you put in here. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Was that it on the questions? The next, fund 296 revolving loan fund. If you recall, a few years ago, this was another odd program that federal government had provided money to. This is a fund that Amy administered out of EDC. Federal government had applied or supplied money to her to have available for, like, if a new business came into town or if a business wanted to expand, they could come to her and apply for a loan from her, from this fund. It was a pool of money, and, you know, just like any other loan, she could loan to that business if they were starting up or expanding or, you know, trying to get established in town. Then it had regular repayment terms, just like any other loan. The federal guidelines on it became very cumbersome, and the regulations were quite cumbersome. And the decision was made by Amy, and she approached the council to pull out of the federal portion of it. So what that means is we had to, if we ended our involvement or our tie, I guess, with the federal government, we had to pay them back their portion. So there is still some money in this fund, just not as much. That's why you see the revenue basically is your interest coming in. Interest is both from earnings at the bank and if there are any loan payments coming in, but currently there isn't much activity, much loan activity. So the revenues did drop in recent years because the pool is much smaller. Obviously, we give a lot of money back to the federal government. So, questions on that?
You said the intent of these loans were what again?
For businesses that wanted to come in and either have startup, you know, like build a new building here for a new business or some expansion. Some of the businesses in town went to her and got loans to expand their business, like I'm talking add-on, you know, make it bigger, some of the industrial apartments and stuff. So it was more kind of help businesses, I guess, get started, and I'm sure there's criteria. I don't know exactly what all the criteria is. I don't think it's necessarily just for startup business, because I know some of the ones in the industrial park were able to take advantage of this as well, but again, it's more loans to help businesses get going or expand.
Okay, so are they planning on discontinuing this?
I don't believe so. I mean, I know there's still some money in the fund, but I'm not really sure. I've not heard Amy indicate one way or another. I'm not sure what her plans are.
Perfect. Thank
She
you.
does come in periodically and give updates to the council, so that would be a good question. When she comes in, what she's thinking on this going forward.
Is this referred to as gap financing?
I don't really know if it is. It could be, I don't know. We're not involved. She administers it also, the businesses that took advantage of it. I don't know if they had primary financing from other, traditional commercial loans, and then they just came to her for, this gap financing, or if this is, all they needed, they just came to her for the full amount. I'm not sure.
Okay.
And this is Amy.
The press.
ABC.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
All right. Other questions? The next few, with exception of one, the next few are debt service funds. Pretty simple, really. Anytime the city has a large amount of debt, we have to handle it in a separate fund. So the first one, Fund 363, is an energy bond. It was a bond issue. Most of the money went towards the sewer plant. Some went to other buildings around the city. So all of those that benefited from this bond pay into this fund each year just to cover the annual bond payment. So this money that comes in of 173,000, most of it comes from sewer, but other funds also contribute. And then when we get the invoice for the annual bond payment, we just pay it right back out. So that's why the bottom line is zero, or projected to be zero. It's just a money in, money out thing to cover the debt. Questions on that? The next one is this is the exception I was talking about. I'm not really sure why this 367 is a sidewalk program. I'm not really sure why it got put under 367, because that generally is more for debt service funds. I'm not sure how it ever got set up here, but anyway. As everybody remembers, we had that sidewalk program that everybody paid the $50 a year as part of your taxes assessment that went into the sidewalk program fund. This is the fund that came into, and then the money was used to go around town and fix sidewalks. The last several years, the last 2-3 years, not a lot was spent out of it because there was kind of a lot of discussion on where we should spend it. The program, by the way, is ended. The assessment has stopped. Nobody is, paying into it anymore. But there was a lot of discussion on where the funds were going to be spent. So not a lot was done. And then until this year, in 2021, Director Miller, you may want to get a talk, but they've been doing sidewalks all around town. Just before it gets started, I'll just say real quick, I did not know what the current estimate was going to be. I threw 450,000 there as a conservative number. I'm guessing it's not going to hit that this year.
Yeah, I think we're gonna end up going around 375 to 400. It doesn't look like we're gonna get all the ramps done as part of the project. As you guys know, you voted to do ADA ramps throughout the city, and Whiteman engineered that project to do different sections around town. The project is wrapping up. We expect to be done on the 15th, and then finish the punch list stuff shortly after that. So that's where all this money is gonna come from. We wanted to completely deplete the fund, but that doesn't look like we're gonna be able to before winter happens. So we'll probably finish that up next spring.
And that's kind of the problem when you
do budgets like this time of year on construction projects like this, you know, if they end up getting like a really nice weather for the next month and a half, you know, maybe they'll, we'd be able to do that, but this is Michigan, so it's unlikely. That's why, just to be safe, I put it at 450, thinking we probably wouldn't hit that, but, because, you know, it's starting to get cold, makes a lot of rain, it makes it a lot more complicated than trying to get the project done. So like Director Miller said, if they wrap it up and we spend less, 375 to 400, that excess will just carry over into next year and will be available to spend next year. So regardless, either way, it could probably pretty much be depleted by next year. So this fund will probably go away after 2022.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. You said the project will end the 15th, is that 15th of November?
Yes.
And then it'll start again next year?
Well, this part of the project will end on the 15th, and then we'll have a punch list stuff just to like touch ups on the project. So that'll probably take just a couple more weeks after that. Yes, and then we'll figure out what to do with the rest of the money next year.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, now we get back to more debt service funds. Fund 369 is the Albion Building Authority bond issue. That was a bond issue that was kind of done, two bond issues kind of done in conjunction. Kind of done the same. One was for a bunch of renovation after the fire at Maple Grove. The other one was for the new fire ambulance barn across the street here. The Maple Grove, if you look down under the expenses and appropriations, you see there's zero budgeted or zero activity in 2022. That's because the Maple Grove bond paid off. The tour is paid off. The bond on the fire ambulance barn continues on, I think it's to 2027, if I remember right. But either way, right now, the way this works is the ambulance authority pays into this fund and they send us money we put into this fund, as well as public safety for their portion for the fire. It's like a 1/3, 2/3, if I recall. Or it's like 60-40%, I think. And helping ambulance pays about 40% in, public safety pays about 60% in. That money then is just used to make the annual bond payment. So we'll get money in, money out. Questions on that?
Yes, I do have a question. So the Maple Grove bond itself is paid off.
Correct.
So does that mean we're not collecting any more money? Like,
Right.
okay,
Right,
great, okay.
on that portion, Maple Grove is making the contribution to cover that. They're two different bonds, but they're kind of done, yeah. So Maple Grove is not kicking in for that. Make sense?
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
I
yeah,
didn't know
yeah.
if I answered.
I was just like, oh, well, Maple Grove's still paying, we can tell that, yeah, that's fine, really, but.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So if there's no money, no pay off the money.
Be nice to work that way, yeah.
Yeah.
The last debt service fund is Fund 374, the DPW building. For those that aren't aware, the city bought what used to be the Calhoun County street garage out on 26 Mile Road, is it, or whatever it is up there. The city purchased that from the county. We pay $15,000 a year and land contract payment. Most of the money that's paid in comes from the DPW streets. However, there are some coming in from sewer, water, a few other departments because of the equipment that's there. They use the garage for the equipment. If they, do repairs to the equipment or whatever out there. So multiple funds pay into that. And then again, that money is just used to make the annual $15,000 payment to the county. Questions on that? Okay, now we get into Fund 450, street improvement fund. This is where the street millage money comes into. It's a little confusing because earlier we talked about local street and major streets. The street millage money does not go into them at all, has nothing to do with them. That they get funded through Act 51, and again, it's more for street repairs and maintenance and stuff like that. For street improvements, which basically might be a little misleading title, it's more, this is more street construction, new resurfacing, fixing streets. This is where the street millage money comes in. And as you can see, the revenues coming in are running about 300,000 a year, give or take. Of course, they have a little interest there. When we do large projects, we will transfer money in from, like if there are sewer lines or water lines under the street, we'll transfer money in from sewer water, to help. So when you see the transfer in, that's what that is. It means we've done a street project, and we also replaced other things such as, sewer water. And in the case of these recent years, we have done some very costly projects, and we had to transfer money in actually from local and major streets to help cover it. So again, even though those streets are primarily for repair, they had a pretty strong health fund balance, so we actually transferred some money in from major and local to help cover some of the costs of the new street construction. I wanted to point out something on this. If you look at 2020 activity on the bottom there, fund balance was 444,000. We're projecting it to end this year at 99.6, which is a $345,000 drop. Hold that thought for a minute. And if we flip to the next page, 452 is the MDOT street construction fund. Same type of thing used for street resurfacing, reconstruction, but it is more for the streets where MDOT is involved. So if MDOT grants are involved and stuff, we do some of the projects out of there. For example, we did Irwin Ave out of this fund. No money comes into this fund in a normal sense, but if we're going to do a large project, generally there's an MDOT grant involved in this fund, and then anything that the city has to cover, we will transfer in either from the 450 fund or, sewer, water, whatever, major local. So again, looking at the fund balance on 2020, it was 187. And in 2021, we're projecting it to be 51.8. So that's a drop of 135,000. What's kind of ironic, or not ironic, kind of concerning, I guess, it just, here's the thing, I guess, is we tried to explain how we really try to work with the state, MDOT, sometimes federal government, and we try to use this money when there is grant money available for the street projects. When I look at fund balance on these, the combined fund balance, it'll dip down a little bit when we do a project, it'll build back up from taxes, it dips a little, and it builds back up, and then bam, we hit in 2019, we did North Street and started Irwin. We had a lot of grant money for Irwin, very little for North. So most of North had to be paid out of our pocket. It took a huge dive in fund balance. We transferred in a bunch of money from water, sewer, local, major, other funds to get the fund balance built back up. And then in 2021, we did first, second, third, and wild without any grant money. Like there's 235,000 roughly in grants for a $1.5 million project. So the city had to pay $1.25 million out of our pocket for those streets. So earlier, way back, I know before the break, way back, and I said, try to kind of remember the drop in the local and major funds, and that fund balance. And I know you don't, just to give you an idea. So this fund dropped 135,000. Fund 450, 345,000. Fund 202, major street dropped 380,000. Fund 203, local streets dropped 185,000 for a total of $1,046,000. That does not count what sewer and water contributed. It hit us hard. There's just no question about it. We did not have $1,046,000 sitting around to what we did, but it depleted our fund balance. So two things with this, I guess. One is it's just really important if we can to try to spend our money to get the most bang for the buck. If we can try to match the projects with grants that are coming in, it makes a huge difference, because instead of paying 100% of it, we may only have to pay 20% or 30% to get the same project done. And it makes our money go a lot longer, or way farther. The other thing, you'll see on these, we have not budgeted any project for 2022 because there's no money left to, the amount left in the fund balance is so insignificant that we're not gonna have enough money to do anything in 2022. So, question.
Tom, that presents a problem because I'm looking at, well, I was out on Albion Street yesterday, and the west side of the city has not been done a lot to. And coming down Albion Street from up by where the house, the Snyder building and around is, it's a mess. I mean, the street is a mess. Coming up Albion Street and coming up Broadwell Street and then going down Albion Street. And I have a good idea, Chestnut Street is a mess too. But I had a good idea that when they put in the new bridge, those streets are gonna get a lot more, especially Chestnut, because when they were doing work down at the Malibu, and there was another time that they did some work on Albion Street down by the Malibu area, Chestnut Street was just used, the big trucks and everything, and it's already got holes in them. And where the city has dug up at the bottom and the hole there and everything. And so what do you do about that? Because it's not a main thoroughfare. So you're not gonna get a lot of state money, but still you can't just leave them like they are either. So that's something to think about.
That's where, when we come to present that local street knowledge, it's very important. That's when we come to present that local street knowledge we've been talking about. It's extremely important that we push that and get that back so we can repair those roads.
My thought on Director Miller is kind of hit on the head. We need more money, that's all it is. And of course, we've heard.
So which bank are we gonna rob?
Well, bank. Hey, I don't know. We've heard Gary Thompson talk about this a lot. The funding mechanism for streets is horrendous in the state. And whether you look at our Act 51 money or whether you look at what we're taking in our millage, when you look at $1 million a mile, in our case, it's more than that generally because of, number one, the infrastructure under the street, and number two, in a city, you also have curb and gutter and sometimes sidewalks that's affected, so the price even goes up. And we don't take in enough to even cover a quarter mile a year. It's just crazy. And had it not been for grants, we wouldn't be able to do as much as was done. But again, whether we want to look at, there's options out there. More millage money. Some communities look at assessments. I know City Manager Darwin, or what was his name, Clary, when he was here, talked about that. I don't personally think that will work well in Albion because we don't have enough houses on most of our streets for those. It would be such a huge amount for each house to absorb. I don't think they can afford it. It'd be different if you're talking a big street, you know, with hundreds of homes on it, but when you got a street with 10 homes or something, they can't absorb. You break up $1 million, they're not gonna pay 100,000 a piece, you know, I mean, it's, so it is an issue.
Yeah, this is the part where when I was looking through this is where I was like, okay, so our city manager brought us a couple of options for a road millage. We keep hearing our constituents say they want the roads fixed. We know that Act 51 isn't gonna change overnight, even though Commissioner Hopkins is railing away as much as he can to get that switched. And so if we're gonna make any headway here, we're gonna have to ask the voters and people who live here to up a millage so that we could actually fix some of the roads. And hopefully Director Miller and City Manager Snyder, when we think about this millage, we'll have a nice plan to put forward that we can actually put it in front of voters and say, this is what you're voting for, this is how much it's gonna cost you, and this is where we're gonna start. And let everyone know what we wanna do to fix the roads and let them, and because we can't just pass a millage here, we have to let the voters decide. This presents a huge opportunity in 2022 if we really are serious about fixing our roads. So, and actually having a road millage in place will help with grant funding and the new infrastructure bill that was just passed in Congress last night. We can take advantage of more funding if we actually leverage some of our own funding too. So I just think that this piece here, we don't have money for roads.
Right.
We don't have enough money ever. And we need to start messaging that to the people who live in this town who want to have nice roads. So, because it's something I've heard the entire time I'm on council, so people run on to get in these seats. And the truth is, we have very little power in making sure that we have the money to do the roads other than to put a village in front of the voters. So this is gonna have to be a really strong message going forward if we're really serious about fixing these roads.
Yes, Councilman Williams.
Thank you, Mayor. Do we currently have a millage in place for roads?
Yep, 3 mills.
3 mills? So would that expire or would we add to that?
Well, the street millage is a 5-year millage, and we are in the second, 22 will be the second year, I believe. So it more or less have to be added to, and the 3 mills, just to give you an idea, you know, like I said, it brings in just under 300,000, 260, I think was the number, about 260,000 that brings it to for the 3 mills, so we're still coming up short, way short.
And Councilmember Williams, the proposal that we presented to council a few meetings ago, an additional 3 mills, 6 mills, or 9 mills. So you're looking roughly 250,000, 500,000, and then 750,000.
On top of the.
Correct, yes.
And I think you're right, I think we'll see, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up, Councilman Williamson, you mentioned other sources of funding. I can't remember if it was a bond or something along the lines of how even with the 9 mills shoot for the moon, that's still, we're talking just over average street ratings in 20 years. So if we wanted to get our roads done sooner and to a greater extent, I know you mentioned the tax assessment and special tax assessment districts, but I'm curious what all the options are. Just so we can kind of look at that before, you know, coming to the residents and proposing upwards to even 12 mills in taxes.
Yes, Councilman.
Yeah, I just want to speak to the bond. I asked at the last meeting when the road millage ideas were brought forward, I asked if we could do similarly to what what schools do, where you put out a certain amount of years bond, but it raises your mills a certain amount of time, so you can leverage all the money up front to get the roads done first, but then you pay over time. That's what I was getting, and eventually the taxpayer has to pay the bill. But if we bond it, then we are able to get it done quicker, so we could do $20 million in roads up front rather than 20 million over 10 years, with that type of thing. So similar to what the schools are trying to do, which is $40 million of work rather quickly, but you have to pay it over a certain amount of time. Eventually we'll have to pay it something.
Thank you for that.
I think it definitely is a topic that needs more conversation at some point, you know, but it sound even worse, but don't forget our Act 51 money, because of the census thing, is gonna be dropping about 70,000 a year too, from what we currently get, so. It's gonna be a challenge, definitely something that we're gonna have to put some thought into, and probably have some discussions.
Director, I mean, is there a max on how, our bond capacity?
There is, like, if I remember the number, I think it's about, I can't remember, it's based on your taxable value of your community, I think. I don't remember if it's like 5% maybe, or 8% or something of your taxable value of your community. I'll have to double check for sure.
But I pose that question just because we are going to be seeking 60 million in bonds for the wastewater treatment plant improvements. So there are different options, but with that, if we are reaching our max, that may not be a solution for growth, depending on what our max capacity is.
Is it also possible that we can wait and see what the actual infrastructure rollout's gonna be, as far as the budget?
For our purposes, I mean, we have to have a budget approved by the end of the year, but we can always amend it. Amending it is pretty simple process. We just bring that piece that needs amended back to the council, back to you guys, and we can do that at any time.
And I didn't mean to derail the conversation into this whole like millish thing, but this is the part of the budget, like, this is what we have, this is what we have to work with. We're gonna have to pass the budget this year, but I just wanted to highlight that when we talk about roads, it's really easy to say we need to fix the roads, but we need the money to do it, and we have to really message that to folks when they come to us and say, why are you fixing my road? Well, it's $1 million to fix your road, and we get maybe 300 this year. So we need to be really good with our citizens and messaging that back to them.
So I think Councilmember Rings, it was a great question, because at the next meeting, I'm looking for direction from you all on, were you happy with the information that we provided on the additional 3, 6, or 9 mills? Because then that will allow us to work with Whiteman and Associates to develop a transportation asset management plan, which details, okay, in the first however many years, these are the roads that we will tackle. In the next 5+ years, these are the roads that we're tackling. So at this point, we just need direction from council on which way we're gonna go with that, because we all know that we need to address our roads.
Little side note, it's kind of humorous in a way. I mean, listen to Barry Thompson talk about this. Councilmember Snyder, City Manager Snyder and I were talking about this the other day. We were looking at the current Act 51 money that the state, they had like 669 million statewide. Of that, 30 million was coming from the gas tax, which to me, I always thought that was the bulk of it. I thought that's why we pay so much gas taxes. That made up the bulk of it. 35 million was coming from recreational marijuana license. So the state's already taken advantage of the recreational marijuana and putting 35 million out to the streets. But 600 million was being diverted from the state's income tax. It just seemed like a very strange mix or source of revenue to, give back to local communities. I mean, why are we using the state's income tax? I mean, it'd be nice, like Gary Thompson says, if we had some different system, it'd be nice. I mean, how come the communities can't get some of that 600 million in income tax for our general fund, instead of coming back for street repairs and stuff? But anyway, kind of, like I said, it's a mess. So it's probably got to start at the state. Whatever works out. Next fund, Fund 590 is our sewer fund. Couple things about this. No significant changes in here. Once we know more on the USDA grant, we bring back budget amendment when we get to that point. Right now, it's pretty up in the air. We don't know exactly what will be approved. We don't know how much might be grant, how much might be bond. We have no idea yet what the actual, a good estimate, I guess, of the costs are. Because obviously we're in preliminary stages, so at some point we will have to come back and amend this if we do get going on the USDA budget 2022. And another thing that we may have to look at amendment on is we just got word that the engineering on this is gonna start generating some pretty significant bills as we go down the road towards getting the USDA grant. So we got a meeting next Friday, I guess, to talk with the engineers on that, see kind of get a better handle on how much it is. We may have to come back to you on the final numbers that we bring you. They may be a little different based on what those engineering costs are, so. But I do want to show you too, if you look at the fund balance, bottom line, 19, we had a 5,046,000 fund balance. It dropped in 20 to 4,000,008. If you jump over to 2021, we're projecting it to drop to 4,005,000. Excuse me, in 2022, looking at 4,003,000. Even though we had sewer rate increases, there's still, we went so long without raising rates, even though we got this rate increase structure in place. We're still barely treading water each year, so something to think about is we definitely, if we go with this USDA loan, I'm sure they'll come back to us with suggested rates once again, so it's something council will be having to discuss and talk about, so.
If I can go off of that, if not this next council meeting, the first December meeting, we will be presenting rate increases for our sewer funds. Jeff Landers, the engineer from our bridging, if you can recall from his presentation on the USDA application, we have to raise it even further to cover that initial payment for this program. So information on that will be coming here within the next meeting or so.
Questions on that? Next one, Fund 591 is our water fund. Kind of a similar situation there with trend and fund balance. I want to point out, if you look at, and again, water fund or the water rates are something we have talked about, but we have not taken action on yet. So those have not been changed in several years. I can't remember the last year if they were increased. And if you look at the fund balance in 2019, it was 5,689,000. It dropped in 2020 to 5,342,000. You jump over to 2021 projected, we're looking at a drop down to 5,014,000. In 2022, a drop down to 4,008,000. That trend, I don't know. I have one more chart, but I'm not good about it going up, but I mean, if everybody can see, I mean, it's a steady downward. It's a concerning trend. It's dropping steadily, and we're seeing it in the cash balance on both sewer and water. They're getting downward. They're pretty tight. So something that we really are going to have to address, in addition to the sewer rates, are the water rates. And again, those have not been increased. And I can't remember when, so just something for everybody. More good news, I guess.
Just for that, our sewer and water, they're enterprise funds, meaning the fees that we charge for these services are supposed to maintain to cover the cost for our maintenance and repairs needed to provide those services. And when we don't increase rates for years at a time, we have to dip into our fund balance to cover that. So moving forward, I know nobody likes to raise rates, but I think so that we're not running into this situation again, if we do consistent rate increases, that will, I think, work better with our residents instead of waiting so long and then coming with a substantial rate increase. If we do smaller increases each year, I think it'll take the large burden off of our residents, and we'll be able to maintain these funds by bringing in the proper revenues.
And everyone you talk to, whether it be rural water, USDA, rural development, any of those places recommend a inflationary increase at a minimum each year, and we've just never done that. So yeah, definitely something we gotta look at trying to do. Questions on that? Oh, and I want to add real quick to follow what City Manager Snyder said. It is actually state law that says on the enterprise fund, you will charge a revenue adequate to cover your expenses in that fund. That this is the way the state law is worded on those enterprise funds. And it not only is to cover the operations and repairs, but also future, replacement of infrastructure. And if we get this USDA bond, I know USDA will require us to not only pay the annual bond payment, but they will require us to set up a separate fund. And they will determine how much we need to put in that fund every month or every quarter over time to build up that fund for future replacement of infrastructure. USDA is very, very, very big on making sure you're disciplined enough that you're setting money aside so that down the road in 10 years, 20 years or whatever, you don't have to keep going back for more money from them. You hopefully build up enough to be able to replace your infrastructure on an as needed basis. So they're very big at making set money aside for that. So, which is another reason rates are going to go up, because they will tell you, hey, if you're going to make enough to not only cover the bond, but also set money aside, this is kind of where the rates got to be. So, next one is Fund 661, equipment pool. I mean, nothing's really changed in the equipment pool. Of course, that's the pool where we purchase all the equipment and vehicles for DPW. It's holding rather steady, but if you look at the fund balance, 2020 we had 149. We're looking at 139 in 2021, 151 in 2022. Holding steady, but fund balance is kind of also a little bit of a reflection in some instances of your cash. Not exactly, but kind of an indication of where your cash balance might be too. When you start thinking of replacing, a $100,000 backhoe or, the kinds of costly equipment that we have in our DPW fund, the boom truck, things like that, 150,000 is not going to go very far. Yeah, we could maybe make a payment with it, loan payment to spread it out, but I just want to point out to everybody that it's holding its own, but it's not accumulated the type of money that it should be if we are trying to really set ourselves up where we can repurchase or purchase new equipment, replace equipment on an as needed basis. And again, I think it's been that whole years and years and years of just kind of kicking the can down the road. So something to think about too, just not a lot of money there. Same story for every fund pretty much, we're just really tight on money we can hold our own, but we're not making big improvements. So, questions on that? These last few funds are actually some trust funds, so not much really happens to them. First one, Fund 711, is a cemetery trust fund. As graves are purchased, a portion of that goes into a perpetual care fund. So it comes into this particular fund. We are restricted on how we use that money. Actually, we kind of were inadvertently using some of that money incorrectly in the past. When we got looking at it a little closer, we're really only supposed to be spending the earnings on that fund. Unfortunately, with interest rates being what they've done in the last several years, the earnings are pretty minimal. And that's kind of what's reflected there on these revenue lines. Basically, it's just the earnings on interest or investment interest and stuff from the fund. So we don't even have any expenses projected because that earning amount is so small, it's not really worth dipping into for using for anything else, so. Questions on that?
Yes, so I had one question on, and it pertains to 7-Eleven and 735, since these are both perpetual trusts at the moment. They're just basically earning regular like savings account interest or checking account interest, correct? They're not actually, they're not invested in earning, you know, what the markets are putting out between 10 and 13% right now.
Two answers for that. So on the cemetery trust, they are earning, some of it is the bank rate. There is a larger portion of it that's in a, it's called Michigan Class. They are a investment firm that is basically, I don't really know how to describe it. It's kind of a savings account that accrues considerably more interest than the bank, but there's no time duration. It's not like a CD or something. I mean, you can put money in and out daily or however you want to do it, but it does pay more than the bank. That is where the cemetery trust money is invested.
Okay,
In the regular bank and the Michigan Class.
is that the same thing for the Albion Trust as well?
No.
No.
The Albion Trust is actually invested with, okay, spot, what's the name of it? Stifle,
I'm picturing that statement.
yeah, Stifle, something, right? It's an investment firm, investment company. Kind of like a Merrill Lynch or whatever they are. But it's Stifle and something or other. And I don't know why they ever chose years ago to use that particular firm, investment firm. But that's where it's been invested. So they are in fact investing in, you know, other types of investments. So, and I think their earnings are doing a little better than what we're getting with the, I know we're doing better than what we're doing with the banks right now. So.
No, that was my main question concerning those two funds. I mean, you know, having 255,000 in the, or 260,000 in cemetery trust, I mean, if every year that could earn above 10%, that would be a lot of money, and a lot of money. And the same thing with over $1 million sitting in the Albion Trust. I mean, 10% a year is almost $100,000 that you could add to the bottom line of that trust fund to further do infrastructure. I mean, these are two kind of assets that we have that I'm not sure. Again, there might be rules that, so I might speak out of turn. I would want to know the rules on this, but
sure,
why wouldn't we want to have these dollars making money for the city when we know that the cemetery is going to have all sorts of repair issues with the mausoleum? And then particularly pertaining to the Albion Trust, which is all infrastructure parks related. I mean, $100,000 a year, the bottom line of that fund, you know, could be significant when we think about the things that we want to do to make our community nice. So I just, that was my main concern this time around, when now that I've had a couple of years on council, the budget process, I wanted to ask those questions and see what the rules are, because these investment earnings are really not good.
yeah, I will. That's an excellent point. And I think it's probably one that would be worthwhile for me to come back to you guys in the future.
Sure.
When some of this is behind us and give some better explanation on restrictions and what, you know, like I say, regulations. But I will add to that I was really shocked, and when we started this budget process, I could tell you in every single fund, the amount that we, from our original budget for 2021, and what we actually took in interest, is just incredibly ridiculous drop. I mean, like a quarter of what we had projected and a quarter of what has been historical. And I was talking actually to a banker yesterday. I think that she said the normal kind of going market rate on banks in is like 0.0025 or so. I mean, it's just, it's almost nothing. It's crazy. And I was, I hadn't realized, I, you know, knew that the rates were down. I guess I hadn't realized that it had dropped that much. And I agree, we really need to start looking at some more sensible ways to try to get some better earnings on that. So, and I think we do have a few thoughts that we could share in the near future that I think are going to help quite a bit. But your question takes it even a step further. So-
Right, and we know that there are things at City Hall that need to be upgraded, we know that there are gonna be things that we need upgraded in the city, you know, when things get broken, we need to fix them, I mean, it's just, if there's a possibility. Colin's raising his hand, I'm sure he's gonna tell us he can't do it, but.
What do you got, Colin?
I was not gonna tell you, just you know, I don't know that the trust is, other than our budgetary concept, come up with, particularly since we have a newer council, but the way that the trust reads, and we redid the trust a couple years ago because it had expired, but it's pretty much the same, with some minor changes, but basically, the way that it reads is, first, the money has to be used for the principal and interest, for any, the senior citizens housing, which I don't think is an issue anymore. Then it's, for purposes of improving, expanding, maintaining, repairing, replacing, reconstructing any structure, part of Maple Grove's, part of Maple Grove Apartments as needed. Any repair, replacement, or reconstruction for Maple Grove that happens as a result of fire, tornado, or any other disaster. And then, if none of those are needed, then it can be used for acquiring, furnishing, equipping, owning, improving, enlarging the operation, maintenance of buildings, automobile parking lots, structures, rec facilities, stadiums. That's what we need nowadays. And things like that. So you can use it after you get past those, assuming that nothing is basically needed for Maple Grove.
But there's nothing in there that restricts it from being invested in the market, right?
From being invested in the market? No, in fact, and as Director Mead said, it is invested in the market.
It is now.
The trustees that manage the trust, I'd have to find it in the trust here, but I'm fairly certain I recall they basically have discretion to invest it in certain investment vehicles.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is that they would probably be restricted is they probably have to follow the city's investment policy, which does prohibit some of the high risk type investments and stuff.
So to your point here, actually, I just found it, it says they can invest or reinvest the trust property in direct obligations of the US government, bonds, through GNMA, mutual funds, certificates of deposit, commercial paper with the US. And that's basically it. So.
I think no foreign country investments. And all that stuff, yeah.
No, thank you. That was the one burning question that I've had since I'm comfortable with those money sit there and they could be making money.
And I agree this year in particular, it's terrible. So, good point. Next one, Fund 732 is Public Safety Pension Trust. This is always a nice one to give ourselves, I guess, a pat on the back because we are one of the forerunners in the state on how well funded our public safety pension is. We're 153% or something, which is just, I go to meetings, state, treasury meetings or and they will refer to Alvin as, an example of how a great fund, how well some funds are doing. It's just, I can't say enough about how well funded we are in the public safety pension fund. A lot of communities are well under 100%, way underfunded. So as far as budget terms goes, I mean, they're very healthy. The only thing that really is crazy with them is, markets can change. Most of this is all invested in fact, all of theirs is invested in with the Ancora, an individual that's done it for us for years and years and years, which is, I think, largely why we are so successful. Is he is very astute. He does a lot of the presentations at seminars and stuff on this. But markets can change, from quarter to quarter, and every now and then, you might be up a lot, and then the next market you may be way down on your earnings or your value. It's just simply a market change. So it makes it a little tricky on budgeting for that, but other than that, I mean, it's a healthy, very healthy thing. So questions on that? Next one we talked about a little bit, the 735's Albion Trust. Again, they are, the money from this traditional, or going back in time, the money was put in there from excess earnings at Maple Grove. It built it up significantly, which is why that language is in there that Attorney Harkness just read about having priority to helping them with this money, because that's where the money came from. But they do very well. They invested in, again, it's that stifle, something or other, I can't remember the name of it. Firm that's doing investment. But not to say that, maybe we look around and maybe find something that would do a little better for us on that fund. But questions on that? They generally don't have any expenditures unless someone approaches them. Oh, I'm gonna back up. They generally don't have any expenditures unless somebody approaches them and they ask for money. And with having said that, there is a small possibility. Back when we talked about Maple Grove, I said we may come to you with that $17,000 budget amendment. The alternative was that Maple Grove doesn't pay it. They talked about going to this Elgin Trust and asking them to pay it. So one of the two funds we will probably see a change in the budget numbers, or maybe even a budget amendment, depending on who decides to pay that invoice. Questions? Final one, 737, retiree healthcare. This is basically a fund that is just kind of winding down. Years ago, the city had a self-administered retiree healthcare plan. We had it for 8-10 years, I don't know. We ended it and replaced it with one through MERS. At the time, the way it was set up, it was kind of questionable whether it was really met all the IRS guidelines. So we gave all the employees that were ever in it, ever contributed to it, an opportunity to get their money back if they wanted, or roll it over to the MERS plan or whatever. Every employee did end up getting money back or rolling it over, except for a few that had already retired and are already drawing on it. Right now, the only revenue going into it is the earnings on the account. And the only disbursements are the $2,400 a year that go to the half a dozen employees that retired. And because they're all at Medicare age, they're just getting a small stipend every month to help with some of their prescriptions and some of their medical bills. So we're paying out $2,400 a year, and there's a fairly healthy balance in the fund. I think there's 40,000 or 50,000. I mean, it'll last 7 years. So not much else that I have. If anybody has questions.
Questions for Director?
Always looks like a minute old.
Thank you, Dr.
You're welcome.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, if people have questions on anything specific, I'm always happy to answer them or get more information.
So do we have anybody else for public comment?
I guess, okay, one thing, just to share the timeline, I guess, for budget approval. So our next steps, we will hold our public hearing for the public to come and weigh in at the December 6th meeting, with final approval at our second December meeting, which is December 20th, the 20th.
Councilmember comments? I just have one comment, since we will be meeting again until the following Monday. This coming Thursday evening at the Opportunity High School, we're going to have a community input session for McIntosh Park in regards to splash pad options, playground equipment. Earlier that day, we will go to Harrington to speak with the children who are there and get their input. But the evening session will be for parents Anybody else in the community who would like to weigh in on their opinions as well, 6 p.m. at the Opportunity High School.
Just to go off of that, Mayor, it is a quick turnaround, but we're trying to align how everyone's scheduled with, the engineers from like, get the word out, encourage anyone to participate in the input sessions. We would like the residents to weigh in on what the new splash pad and playground will look like.
Any other comments?
It would be nice if you could get, excuse me. No, but as you, I was gonna say, it would be nice if you could get the information out to the people that are up.
Yep. And then we also are gonna have to try to find another date where we can get to
The
like,
community group in Lincolnshire.
Lincolnshire as well as Charles Snyder, space to get community input there. But for this coming Thursday, like I said, since we're getting together again, this coming Thursday, there's going to be 2
And
sessions.
we have flyers printed that are gonna go door to door. In that neighborhood.
The Harrington meeting, what time is that?
At 1 o'clock? Or we, yeah.
That's
okay.
on Thursday as well?
Yep, Thursday at 1 o'clock, that's when we're meeting with the children at Harrington.
Okay, just a few, city staff as well as the engineers who are, over that project will go in and present, to a few small groups of children and let them.
They're gonna round robin with kids throughout the day to make sure a lot of kids can have a say in what they want to see at the splash pad.
Sounds good.
Anything else, folks? Motion to adjourn?
So
Support. City clerk, can we-
Councilmember Williams,
Yes.
Reed, Jackson,
Yes.
Lawler,
Yes.
Lanu,
Yes.
Williamson,
yes.
and Mayor Snyder.
Yes, thank you all. Good meeting.
Yes.
That'll work.
Enjoy the rest.